You know that feeling when history grabs you by the shoulders and refuses to let go. November 9th, 1989. I was there, standing in the cold Berlin night when the impossible became possible, when concrete and barbed wire that had divided a city for 28 years suddenly meant nothing, when people who'd been separated by ideology, fear, and 70 miles of fortified border started climbing, crying, and dancing on top of the wall that had defined their entire lives. I'm going to take you there tonight, not just the sanitized version you saw on TV, the real version, the messy, emotional, unbelievable version where ordinary people made history with their bare hands and sledgehammers. Because here's what they don't tell you in history books. Revolution smells like champagne and dust. It sounds like thousands of voices singing songs they'd been forbidden to sing. It feels like strangers hugging you so hard your ribs hurt. And I was there for all of it. Let me back up for a second. How does a 24-year-old journalist from California end up in Berlin during the most significant moment of the Cold War? Pure, stubborn curiosity, honestly. I'd arrived in West Berlin 6 months earlier, working for a small international news service that most of you have never heard of. My apartment was in Kreuzberg, close enough to the wall that I could see the guard towers from my kitchen window. Close enough that the searchlights would sometimes sweep across my bedroom ceiling at night. Living in Berlin in 1989 was like living in a city that had learned to breathe with only one lung. You got used to it. The division became normal. You stopped noticing that you couldn't just walk 15 blocks east without crossing into another world, another system, another reality entirely. The wall wasn't just one wall, by the way. That's the first thing that shocked me when I arrived. It was 2 walls, actually. 2 parallel concrete barriers with a death strip in between. Watchtowers every few hundred meters. Guard dogs. Raked sand to show footprints. Anti-vehicle trenches. Tripwire machine guns in some sections. They called it the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart in East Germany. In the West, we called it what it was, the world's most elaborate prison wall. 155 kilometers of it circling West Berlin. Another 70 miles cutting the city itself in half. Families separated. Friends divided. Lovers torn apart. Since 1961, at least 140 people had died trying to cross it. Shot by border guards, blown up by mines, drowned in canals. The youngest victim was only 1 year old. The oldest was 80. You didn't joke about the wall. You didn't get close to it unless you had a reason. And you definitely didn't imagine it coming down, not in our lifetimes anyway. But autumn of 1989 was different. You could feel it. Something in the air had changed. It started in Hungary. In September, they opened their border with Austria. Suddenly, East Germans could vacation in Hungary, then just walk into Austria, into the West. Thousands did exactly that. They abandoned their Trabants by the roadside and ran for freedom. Then the protests started in Leipzig. Every Monday, people would gather at the Nikolai Church. Just a few hundred at first, then thousands, then tens of thousands, marching through the streets chanting, "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people. The East German government didn't know what to do. In China, just months earlier, the government had massacred protesters in Tiananmen Square. Everyone knew it. Everyone wondered if East Germany would do the same. I'd been filing reports about all of this, watching from West Berlin as the pressure built across the border. You could see it in the faces of East Berliners when you went to the checkpoints. Something desperate and hopeful at the same time. Then on October 18th, Erich Honecker resigned. The man who'd led East Germany for 18 years, who'd ordered the wall built higher and stronger, who'd promised it would stand for 100 years, gone. His replacement was Egon Krenz. Same party, same system. But everyone knew it was a panic move. Too little, too late. The protests grew larger. 500,000 people in East Berlin on November 4th. In a city of 1.2 million. Think about that. Nearly half the population in the streets, demanding freedom, demanding change, demanding the impossible, and the government was terrified. I woke up that Thursday morning with a hangover and a deadline. Nothing special on my calendar, just another day of reporting on a divided city. The news that morning was about a new travel law East Germany was drafting. Something about making it slightly easier for people to get exit visas. Bureaucratic stuff. Boring, really. The kind of announcement designed to release pressure without actually changing anything fundamental. I went to the office, filed a story about housing shortages in West Berlin, had a terrible sandwich for lunch, called my mom in San Diego and complained about the weather. Normal stuff. Around 4 p.m. I was half watching a press conference on the small TV in our newsroom. Günther Schabowski, an East German official, droning on about party business. I wasn't really paying attention. Then someone asked him about the new travel regulations. Schabowski shuffled through his papers. He clearly hadn't been briefed properly. He looked confused, started reading from a memo about East Germans being able to cross the border. "Immediately," he said, without delay. Our bureau chief sat up straight. Did he just say what I think he said? We rewound the tape, watched it again. "When does this take effect?" the reporter had asked. Schabowski, still shuffling papers, looking lost. "As far as I know, immediately, without delay." The room went silent. "That can't be right," someone said. "That would mean—" We all looked at each other. If East Germans could cross the border immediately, if they didn't need permits or applications or waiting periods, if they could just go. "The wall?" I whispered. He just opened the wall. Chaos. Beautiful, frantic chaos. Everyone in the newsroom started moving at once, grabbing cameras, notebooks, jackets. The phone lines lit up. Other journalists calling, asking if we'd heard, if it was real, if this was actually happening. Nobody knew. That was the thing. Even Schabowski didn't seem to know what he'd just announced. But the East Berliners knew. They'd been watching. They'd heard him say, "immediately." And they were already moving. I grabbed my camera and recorder and ran for the nearest crossing point. Checkpoint Bornholmer Strasse. About 3 miles from my apartment. I didn't have a car, so I jumped on the U-Bahn, then sprinted the last 6 blocks. My lungs were burning, my camera bag was slamming against my hip, and I could not stop smiling. When I rounded the corner and saw the checkpoint, I stopped running, just stopped and stared. There were hundreds of people there already. Maybe thousands, East Berliners pressed up against the barriers on their side. West Berliners gathering on ours, border guards looking absolutely terrified. Nobody was crossing yet. The guards were still checking papers, still processing people one by one at the official rate. But the crowd was growing every minute. "Let us through," someone shouted from the east side. "The wall is open," another voice. Schabowski said immediately. The guards were on their radios, frantically calling for instructions. What do we do? What are the orders? Did the regulations really change? Can we actually let them through? Nobody in command seemed to know either. I worked my way to the front of the West Side crowd, showed my press credentials to a police officer who barely glanced at them. Everyone's attention was on the border. The East German guards were arguing among themselves. You could see it in their body language. Some wanted to hold the line. Others were looking at the growing crowd and doing the math on how this could end. More and more people kept arriving from East Berlin. Workers from the night shift, students, families, young people in leather jackets, old women with shopping bags, all of them pushing forward, chanting, "Tor auf! Tor auf! Gate open! Gate open!" The pressure was unbearable. You could feel it like a physical force. Thousands of people who'd been told their entire lives they couldn't cross, couldn't leave, couldn't even dream of the other side. And now they'd been told they could go. Immediately, without delay. The guards kept checking their radios, kept making calls. But the crowd was swelling. 10,000 people now, maybe more, pressing against barriers that were never designed to hold back crowds, only to stop individuals. Then at 10:45 p.m., the commander at Bornholmer Strasse made a decision. He gave up. I saw him wave his hand at the other guards, saw them step back from the barriers, and then, like a dam breaking, the crowd surged forward. The first few people came through slowly, almost cautiously, holding their IDs, looking around as if expecting someone to stop them. Expecting this to be a trick, but nobody stopped them. And then everyone else rushed through, a flood of humanity pouring across a border that had been sealed for 28 years. The sound that went up from both sides was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Crying and cheering and shouting all mixed together, people hugging total strangers. A woman next to me collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "They're coming through," I said into my recorder, my voice shaking. "They're actually coming through. The border at Bornholmer Strasse has opened. People are crossing freely. The wall is open." I wasn't a journalist in that moment. I was just a human being watching other human beings reclaim their freedom. The first East Berliner I actually spoke to was a man about 60 years old. Grey hair, thick glasses, wearing a brown jacket that had seen better days. He stood on the West Berlin side looking around like he'd landed on another planet, which, in a way, he had. "I can't believe it," he kept saying in German. "I can't believe I'm here." "When was the last time you were in West Berlin?" I asked. He thought about it. 1961, August 1961. I was visiting my sister. Then they closed the border and I couldn't get back. She's been over here for 28 years. I haven't seen her in 28 years. His voice cracked. "She lives in Wedding." "Do you know how to get to Wedding?" "I need to find her. I need to tell her I'm here." Someone nearby overheard and offered to drive him. Just like that. A complete stranger offering to drive another stranger across the city to reunite with his sister. That was the thing about that night. The normal rules of urban life just suspended themselves. Everyone was helping everyone, sharing champagne, giving directions, making phone calls for people who didn't know West Berlin numbers. The crowd kept growing, both sides now mixing together. You couldn't tell who was from the East and who was from the West anymore. We were all just Berliners. Someone started spraying champagne. Someone else was handing out flowers. A group of students had climbed on top of the actual wall, the concrete barrier just 20 meters away, and were dancing on top of the Berlin Wall. I took photos until my hands were numb from the cold. The flashes from hundreds of cameras created this strange strobe effect, like the whole night was flickering between past and future. An elderly woman grabbed my arm. "Tell the world," she said in heavily accented English. "Tell them we are free. Tell them it's over." "I will," I promised. "I'm telling them right now." Around midnight, I decided to move to Brandenburg Gate. If Bornholmer Strasse was this insane, the gate had to be absolutely wild. I was right. The Brandenburg Gate had been inaccessible for decades. It sat in the no-man's land between East and West, surrounded by barriers and guards, a symbol of division right in the heart of where Berlin used to be united. Now there were thousands of people there, climbing on the wall, hanging from the gate itself, waving flags, singing, chanting, crying, celebrating. West Berlin police had given up trying to maintain order. What were they going to do? Arrest people for celebrating? Instead, they just stood back and made sure nobody got hurt. The East German guards on their side were still at their posts, but they'd stopped pointing their guns. They just stood there, watching their world change in real time. Some of them looked relieved, actually, like they'd been waiting for permission to stop being the villains in everyone else's story. I saw one guard, couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, leaning against his watchtower. A West Berlin woman walked up to the barrier and handed him a flower through the fence. He took it, looked at it, then looked at her. "Thank you," he said quietly. She was crying. He might have been too, behind those mirrored sunglasses they all wore. The energy at Brandenburg Gate was different from Bornholmer Strasse. More raw, more symbolic. This was the wall. The image that had been on every news broadcast, every magazine cover, every documentary about the Cold War, and people were taking it apart with their bare hands. Hammers appeared from somewhere, chisels, even just rocks. People were chipping away at the concrete, creating scars and holes, taking pieces as souvenirs, as proof, as evidence that this was real. Each chunk that broke off got a cheer. People were passing around bottles of champagne and beer. Someone had brought a trumpet and was playing jazz. Badly, but enthusiastically. I watched a young couple, couldn't have been older than 20, kissing on top of the wall. Just standing there, silhouetted against the lights, kissing like they'd invented the concept. Maybe for them, in that moment, they had. You want to know what freedom sounds like? It sounds like thousands of two-stroke Trabant engines all running at once. That's what hit me around 2 a.m. The Trabis were coming. For those who don't know, the Trabant was the iconic East German car. Plastic body, two-stroke engine, waiting list of 10 years to buy one. They were slow, they were loud, and they produced enough blue smoke to make you think the car was dying. On November 9th, they were freedom machines. The streets of West Berlin suddenly filled with these little cars, all heading the same direction, into the West, to see what they'd been forbidden to see for nearly 3 decades. I stood on the Kurfürstendamm, West Berlin's main shopping street, and watched the parade. Trabi after Trabi, packed with families. Kids pressed against the windows, parents crying while driving, horns honking in celebration. West Berliners lined the streets, applauding every car that passed, handing up flowers through the windows, champagne bottles, money even. Welcome money, they called it. West Germany had a policy of giving 100 Deutschmarks to every East German who crossed over. One Trabi stopped right in front of me. The driver, a man in his 40s, just sat there with his hands on the wheel, staring at the bright lights of the shopping district. The neon signs, the store windows full of products that didn't exist in his world. His wife was crying in the passenger seat. His kids were in the back, faces glued to the windows, absolutely silent with wonder. "Is this real?" he asked, no one in particular. "Is any of this real?" "It's real," someone in the crowd shouted. "Welcome to West Berlin." The man started crying too. Then he started laughing. Then he laid on his horn and joined the celebration. That sound, the sound of Trabant horns mixed with cheering and champagne corks and people singing, that's the sound of a wall coming down. Here's what's strange. The wall itself didn't actually come down that night. Not physically. The border was open. People were crossing freely, but the concrete barrier was still standing, still dividing the city, still there, physically, even if it had lost all its power. I watched people attack it with everything they had. Hammers, pickaxes, their shoes, their fists. Concrete is hard, it turns out. Really hard. You can't just knock down a 12-foot-high, reinforced wall with hand tools. Not quickly, anyway, but they tried. Oh, they tried. I saw a man who must have been 70 years old, swinging a sledgehammer at the wall with tears streaming down his face. Each hit sent a tiny chip of concrete flying. Progress measured in grams, not pounds. 28 years, he gasped between swings. 28 years this thing has stood here. Swing. Dividing families. Swing. Killing children. Swing. Today we kill it back. He couldn't have been making more than a small dent, but he didn't care. It wasn't about efficiency, it was about catharsis, about hitting back at the thing that had hit them for so long. Other people were spray-painting the wall, messages in German, English, Russian, French. Freedom. Unity. Never again. Hearts with the dates, 1961 to 1989. Names of people who died trying to cross. One artist was creating this elaborate mural on a section near Potsdamer Platz. Even in the chaos, even with people climbing all over the wall around him, he was carefully painting, creating something beautiful on the surface of something that had only ever been ugly. "What are you painting?" I asked. He stepped back so I could see. It was a bird, a massive bird with its wings spread, breaking through chains. "We were all in a cage," he said. "Now we fly." As the night went on, I collected stories. That's what journalists do, right? We collect the pieces and try to make sense of the whole. There was Klaus, a school teacher from East Berlin, who'd been planning his escape for 3 years. He'd been saving money, making contacts, trying to figure out the safest route. And then Schabowski opens his mouth, and suddenly I don't need any of it. I just walked across. Just walked. There was Petra, who'd been separated from her husband since 1975. He'd tried to escape, got caught, served 5 years in prison. Then they'd exiled him to the West. She'd been trying to get permission to join him ever since. 14 years of applications and rejections and bureaucratic walls. "I called him," she told me, still holding the phone card she'd used at a West Berlin payphone. "I called him and said, 'I'm here.' He thought I was joking. Then he heard the noise in the background, all the celebrating, and he just started crying. He's driving up from Munich right now. He should be here by morning." There was Michael, a 20-year-old engineering student who'd never known Berlin without the wall. Born in 1969, the wall had been there his entire life. "I don't know what to do now," he said, looking around at the crowds. "Everything I was taught, everything I believed about how the world works, it's all wrong. They told us the West was our enemy, that we needed the wall for protection, that socialism was forever." He laughed bitterly. "Forever lasted 40 years. There was Hans, a retired factory worker who'd been at work when they built the wall in 1961. "I was on the night shift," he remembered. "Came home in the morning to find my street cut in half. My mother lived 4 blocks away. Suddenly she was in a different country. I never saw her again. She died in 1979. He was carrying a sledgehammer. "I'm taking this whole damn thing down," he said. "One piece at a time if I have to." Every story was different. Every story was the same. 28 years of division, ending in one impossible night. What's hilarious in retrospect is how unprepared the politicians were, on both sides. Nobody in power had planned for this. The East German government certainly hadn't meant to open the wall. Schabowski's announcement was a miscommunication, a bureaucratic mistake that spiraled out of control. The West German government was caught completely off guard. Chancellor Helmut Kohl was on an official visit to Poland. He had to cut it short and rush back to Berlin. The Americans were scrambling. The Soviets were scrambling. The British and French were scrambling. Everyone had contingency plans for World War III. Nobody had a contingency plan for peace breaking out. I listened to the radio as I walked around that night. Politicians making statements, trying to sound like they'd expected this, trying to take credit or assign blame or just make sense of something that made no sense according to the rules of the world we'd all been living in. But the people didn't care about the politicians. That was the beautiful part. This wasn't a top-down revolution. This was bottom-up. The people had decided the war was over, and the war was over. All the power structures, all the military might, all the guards and guns and barriers, none of it mattered once enough people decided it didn't matter. That's a lesson I've carried with me for 35 years. Power only exists when people agree to it. The moment they stop agreeing, the powerful become powerless. The Berlin Wall didn't fall because governments decided to tear it down. It fell because millions of people decided it was already gone. I don't think I slept more than an hour that night. How could you sleep? History was happening. Every moment was significant. Every conversation was important. By 4 a.m., I'd filled 3 notebooks and 4 tape recorders. I'd shot 12 rolls of film. I'd interviewed what felt like hundreds of people. My feet hurt. My throat was raw from shouting to be heard over the crowds. My fingers were numb from the cold, and I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Around dawn, I found myself back at Brandenburg Gate. The party had calmed down slightly. Some people had gone home to sleep. Others had been replaced by the morning shift of celebrators. But the wall was still there, scarred now, covered in graffiti and dents and chips, but standing. I sat down on a curb and just stared at it. This thing that had defined the Cold War, this thing that had killed people, separated families, divided a city, split a nation, and symbolized the division of the entire world into two hostile camps. It looked smaller somehow, less imposing. Like Oz after Dorothy pulled back the curtain. A woman sat down next to me, about my age, East Berliner based on her clothes. "Did you sleep?" she asked in German. "No. You?" "No," she smiled. "Who could sleep?" We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people continue to chip away at the wall, watching the sun start to come up over a city that was still divided, but not for much longer. "What are you going to do now?" I asked her. She thought about it. "Everything," she said finally. "Everything I couldn't do yesterday." The wall didn't come down all at once. That's not how it works in real life. November 10th, the border was still open. More and more people crossed. The Trabant parade continued. West Berlin essentially threw a days-long party for 3 million unexpected guests. Stores stayed open late. Restaurants gave free food to East Berliners. Strangers invited strangers into their homes. The whole city turned into this bizarre celebration of unity. On November 12th, I went to one of the official crossing points they'd opened up. They'd literally just created a gap in the wall with construction equipment, cut a hole right through it. I watched East Berliners walk through, touching the edges of the concrete as they passed, like they needed to feel the physical reality of it. The wall had a hole in it, an actual, official hole. Construction workers with jackhammers started working on other sections. The sound of concrete breaking became the soundtrack of Berlin. All day, all night, the city was dismantling its own prison. Souvenir sellers appeared almost immediately. Guys with hammers and chisels, breaking off chunks of wall and selling them to tourists for 10 Deutschmarks. Capitalism at its finest. I bought a piece myself. Still have it. About the size of a golf ball, with a bit of the spray paint still visible. My little piece of history. The graffiti on the west side of the wall became world famous. Artists from everywhere came to paint on it. The longest gallery in the world, they called it. 1.3 kilometers of art on top of what used to be pure oppression. On the east side, people kept working with their hammers and picks. Every chunk they removed was a small victory. A tiny revenge against the thing that had imprisoned them. The most powerful stories weren't the big political moments. They were the small personal ones. I met a woman named Helga who'd been separated from her daughter since 1962. Her daughter had been visiting West Berlin when the wall went up. Just a teenager on a school trip. Suddenly, she couldn't come home. They'd written letters for 27 years, talked on the phone when they could, but they hadn't touched each other in all that time. I watched them meet at Checkpoint Charlie on November 11th. Both of them old women now. Helga was 72. Her daughter was 58. They stood there hugging and crying for what must have been 10 minutes, not saying anything, just holding each other, making up for 27 years of hugs that never happened. "I never thought I'd see you again," Helga kept saying. "I never thought..." There were hundreds of scenes like that. Thousands. Families reuniting, friends meeting in person after decades of letters. Lovers holding each other after years of forced separation. Not all the reunions were happy, though. Some people had moved on, built new lives, new families. The wall had been gone for a few days, but the time it had stolen couldn't come back. I interviewed a man who'd been searching for his brother. They'd been separated in 1963. He'd spent 3 days walking around East Berlin, checking the old addresses, asking neighbors. He died, the man told me flatly. 1977, heart attack, nobody told me. How would they? We were in different worlds. He'd spent 26 years imagining the day they'd reunite, and now he never would. "I'm glad the wall is gone," he said, "but it's too late for some of us." By late November, the initial euphoria was starting to give way to more complicated feelings. East Germany was hemorrhaging people. Thousands were leaving every day, crossing into the West and not coming back. Why would they? The West had better jobs, better products, better everything. The East German economy, already fragile, started to collapse. Stores emptied out. Services broke down. The brain drain was catastrophic. In West Berlin, the initial welcome was fading into anxiety. Could the economy absorb millions of new people? What about housing, jobs, schools? The West German government was printing money to give to East Germans. 100 Deutschmarks each, then more. The costs were staggering, and then there was the bigger question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What happens next? Two Germanys had existed for 40 years. Two separate countries with separate systems, separate economies, separate identities. Could they reunite? Should they? The rest of Europe was nervous. A unified Germany had started 2 world wars. Did anyone really want a powerful Germany at the heart of Europe again? The Soviets were in crisis. Their empire was crumbling. Poland was free. Hungary was free. East Germany was effectively free. The whole communist bloc was falling apart. But those were big geopolitical questions for politicians and diplomats. On the ground in Berlin, people were dealing with simpler things, like the young couple I met in early December. He was from the East, she was from the West. They'd fallen in love at first sight at a West Berlin disco on November 10th. "We're from the same city," she said, "but we might as well be from different planets. Everything is different, the way we talk, the way we think, what we know, what we don't know. But we'll figure it out," he said, holding her hand. "The wall couldn't keep us apart. Nothing else can either." That became the attitude. Optimistic confusion. Nobody knew what would happen next, but at least the wall was gone. Christmas 1989 in Berlin was surreal. The wall was still physically there in most places, but it was covered in graffiti now, full of holes. Sections had been removed entirely, and nobody was stopping anyone from crossing anymore. East Berliners flooded into West Berlin to see the Christmas markets. The lights, the decorations, all the Western consumer goods they'd only seen on smuggled TV broadcasts. I watched families from the East wandering through the Kadoui department store, West Berlin's fanciest shopping center, just staring at the abundance. 6 kinds of coffee, 30 kinds of cheese, fresh tropical fruit in the middle of winter. "Is this what it's always like?" a young woman asked me. "Pretty much," I said. She shook her head in disbelief. We had ration cards for butter. The West Berliners, to their credit, were still in generous mode. People were inviting East German families to Christmas dinner, sharing gifts. Churches organized donation drives for people who'd crossed over with nothing. On Christmas Eve, someone organized a candlelight vigil at Brandenburg Gate. Thousands of people standing together, East and West, singing Christmas carols. Silent Night sounds different when it's being sung by people who've been forcibly silenced for decades. I stood there with my candle, watching the faces illuminated in the flickering light. Young and old, East and West, all of them singing about peace and hope and a better world. And for the first time in my life, I actually believed those things might be possible. Here's what the history books and documentaries don't really capture: the mundane weirdness of it all, like the fact that East German money was basically worthless overnight. People would try to use it in West Berlin stores and get laughed at. A cruel reminder that escaping to the West didn't automatically make you Western, or the way some West Berliners got annoyed at the crowds. Yeah, it happened. After a few weeks of traffic jams caused by Trabant and tourists, some people just wanted their city back to normal. Or the scammers who immediately appeared. Fake wall pieces, just regular concrete. Counterfeit "I was there" certificates. People charging East Germans inflated prices because they knew they didn't understand West German money yet, or the environmental disaster the Trabis caused. Thousands of two-stroke engines pumping blue smoke into the air. West Berlin's air quality got noticeably worse, or the way some East Germans went back. They'd crossed over, looked around, and decided their life in the East wasn't so bad after all. The West was overwhelming, expensive, competitive. At least in the East you had job security and cheap rent, or the identity crisis hitting young East Germans especially hard. Their whole worldview had been revealed as a lie. Everything they'd been taught in school about the superiority of socialism, about the dangers of capitalism, about the inevitability of communist victory. All false. One college student I interviewed said, "I feel like I wasted 20 years of my life believing in something that was never real. How do I get those years back?" "You don't," I thought but didn't say. "You just move forward." Through the winter and into spring, the wall kept coming down, piece by piece, section by section. The government started using heavy equipment in June 1990, proper demolition. Bulldozers and cranes instead of hammers and chisels. I went to watch them work on a section near Potsdamer Platz. The machinery made quick work of it. What had taken protesters weeks to chip away by hand disappeared in minutes under a wrecking ball. Efficient, but less satisfying somehow. An old man stood next to me, watching. He'd been there the night of November 9th, too. I recognized him. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "When the people were tearing it down, it felt like revenge, like justice. Now the government is demolishing it, and it just feels like construction work." He was right. The official demolition lacked the emotion of those first days. It was necessary, practical. But the magic was gone. By the end of 1990, most of the wall was gone. Some sections were preserved as memorials. The rest was crushed and used for road construction. The ultimate indignity, the Berlin Wall ended its existence as gravel in someone's driveway. Germany officially reunified on October 3rd, 1990, less than a year after the wall fell. The politicians had moved faster than anyone expected. I watched the reunification ceremony on TV from my apartment in West Berlin. Except it wasn't West Berlin anymore. Just Berlin again. Fireworks over Brandenburg Gate. Speeches about unity and freedom and the future. The German flag. One flag now, not two. Flying everywhere. It should have felt triumphant. And it did, partly. But there was sadness too. Sadness for all the years lost. All the people who died, all the families who never got to reunite, all the potential that had been wasted by keeping a city, a nation, a continent divided. The wall was gone, but its shadow would remain for generations. It's been 35 years now since that night. I'm 59 years old. The young journalist who ran through the streets of Berlin with frozen fingers and a heart full of joy is a distant memory. But I've never forgotten the lessons that night taught me. First, nothing is permanent. The Berlin Wall was supposed to last 100 years. It lasted 28. The Soviet Union was supposed to be forever. It collapsed 2 years after the wall fell. The end of history, everyone proclaimed in the 90s. Turned out history wasn't done with us yet. Every system that calls itself permanent is lying. Change is the only constant. Second, people are braver than you think. The protesters in Leipzig who marched knowing they might be shot. The families who tried to escape even when the odds were impossible. The border guard who lifted the barrier at Bornholmer Strasse. Ordinary people do extraordinary things when they've had enough. Third, the powerful are more fragile than they appear. The East German government seemed invincible. Military, police, surveillance, total control. And it collapsed in weeks because people stopped believing in it. Authority is a performance. It only works if the audience plays along. Fourth, small moments change history. Schabowski's confused press conference, one border guard making a decision, a few hundred protesters in Leipzig who refused to go home. None of them were trying to change the world. They were just responding to the moment in front of them. We don't usually know when we're making history. We just make choices and hope they're right. Fifth, reunification is harder than separation. Germany is still dealing with the consequences of division. East and West Germany still exist in people's minds, in economic statistics, in voting patterns. You can tear down a wall in a day. Healing the damage it caused takes generations. The wall fell 35 years ago, but Germany is still reuniting. I went back to Berlin in 2014 for the 25th anniversary of the wall falling. The city is transformed, unrecognizable in some ways. Where the wall stood there are bike paths and parks. Potsdamer Platz, which was wasteland in 1989, is now a gleaming complex of skyscrapers and shopping centers. The Brandenburg Gate is accessible from all sides. No barriers, no borders, just tourists taking selfies and street performers and people living their lives. There's a memorial now, a preserved section of the wall with photos and stories. I walked along it, reading the plaques about people who died trying to escape. Names I'd heard during my time in Berlin. A school group was there, German teenagers, born after 2000. The wall is ancient history to them, something from textbooks like the Napoleonic Wars. Their teacher was explaining how the city used to be divided. The kids were nodding politely, but you could tell they didn't really get it. How could they? They'd grown up in a united Germany, in a European Union with open borders, in a world where Berlin was a symbol of unity, not division. One girl asked, but why did they build it in the first place? Good question, kid. I wanted to tell them what it was like, to make them understand that this freedom they took for granted, this ability to walk anywhere in their own city, was impossible for most of their lives. But I didn't. Because that's what old people do, right? Tell young people how hard they had it, how much better things are now, boring them with history. Instead, I just took a photo of the memorial and kept walking. The past is the past. Let the kids enjoy the present, but sometimes, even now, I see something that transports me back. A certain angle of winter light, the sound of champagne corks, a crowd of people chanting in German. And suddenly, I'm 24 again, standing in the cold November night, watching history happen in real time. I see the faces sometimes. The old man with the sledgehammer, the mother reuniting with her daughter, the border guard accepting a flower, the young couple kissing on top of the wall. I wonder what happened to all of them. Did the man knock down his section of wall? Did the mother and daughter rebuild their relationship? Did the guard find peace with his role in maintaining the division? Did the couple stay together? I'll never know. They were moments in time. Brief intersections of lives that probably never crossed again, but they mattered. Every single one of them mattered. Because together, those individual moments of courage and joy and defiance and hope added up to something bigger than themselves. They added up to the end of the Cold War, the reunification of Germany. A new chapter in human history. And I got to witness it. I got to be there when the impossible became possible, when the permanent became temporary, when the wall between East and West, between freedom and oppression, between hope and despair, came crashing down. If you're watching this video, you probably have questions. Why should you care about something that happened 35 years ago? What does the Berlin Wall have to do with your life? Fair questions. Here's my answer. The Berlin Wall matters because it reminds us that nothing is inevitable. You're growing up in a world with its own walls. Maybe not made of concrete and barbed wire, but walls nonetheless. Walls between rich and poor. Walls between nations. Walls between people who think differently. Digital walls, economic walls, cultural walls. And you're being told, like East Germans were told, that these walls are necessary, permanent, for your own protection, just the way things are. Don't believe it. The Berlin Wall was sold as permanent and necessary. It lasted one generation. It fell because people decided it should fall. The walls in your world can fall too. Will fall eventually. The question is whether you'll be part of making it happen or part of maintaining them. On November 9th, 1989, I saw ordinary people do an extraordinary thing. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for governments to agree. They just decided the wall was over and made it true. You have that same power. Whatever walls you're facing in your life, in your community, in your world, you can tear them down. Maybe not overnight, maybe not alone, but you can do it. Start with the small walls, the ones between you and someone different from you, the ones between what you are and what you could be, the ones between what is and what should be. Chip away at them, piece by piece, just like those Germans with their hammers and chisels. And maybe, if enough people chip away at enough walls, your generation will see them fall too. There's a moment that comes back to me sometimes. Not from November 9th. From a few weeks later, I was walking near where the wall used to be. Part of it had been demolished already. You could walk straight across Bornholmer Strasse now, from east to west, without even thinking about it. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was playing in the dirt where the wall had stood, making a mud pie or something, just a kid playing. Her grandmother stood nearby, watching. She must have been in her 70s, old enough to remember Berlin before the wall, to remember when you could walk anywhere in your own city. The woman was crying, quiet tears running down her face as she watched her granddaughter play in a space that had been forbidden and deadly for most of the child's grandmother's life. I walked over. Couldn't help myself. "Are you okay?" I asked in German. She smiled at me. My granddaughter doesn't know there was ever a wall here. To her, this is just part of the street, part of the city. She'll grow up not knowing Berlin was ever divided. More tears. Happy ones, I think. "That's what we fought for," she continued. "Not for ourselves, for them. So they could play in the street without walls, without borders, without fear." The little girl looked up at us, confused why her grandmother was crying. Then she went back to her mud pie, completely unconcerned. That's when I knew. Really knew. The wall falling mattered not because of what it ended, but because of what it began. A world where children could play in spaces their grandparents had bled and died to cross. Where the impossible could become normal in the space of a generation. That little girl is 40 years old now, the same age her grandmother was when the wall went up. She's never lived in a divided Berlin, never had to carry papers to cross the street, never had to watch friends get shot trying to escape. To her, the wall is ancient history, a story, a memorial. And that's perfect, that's victory. November 9th, 1989. The night the Berlin Wall fell. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, documented it with my camera and my notebooks, lived it with every cell in my body. And I'm telling you now, 3.5 decades later, it was real. It happened. People made it happen. The impossible became possible because enough people decided it should. The permanent became temporary because enough people stopped believing in it. The wall came down because people tore it down, and if that could happen in Berlin in 1989, what else might be possible? What walls in your world might fall if you decide they should? What impossible things might become possible if enough people believe? I don't know what the next 35 years will bring. What walls will fall, what new ones might be built, what impossible things might become reality, but I know this. The people have more power than they know. More power than governments want them to know. The power to say no. The power to say enough. The power to say the wall falls today. Use it wisely. Use it bravely. Use it before it's too late for another generation. Because somewhere, right now, there's a child playing in the dirt where a wall used to be. And they don't know there was ever a wall there. That's what we're fighting for. That's what it's all about. Not for ourselves. For them. For the kids who will inherit whatever world we leave them. Let's leave them one with fewer walls. So that's my story. The night I was there when the Berlin Wall fell. If you made it this far, thank you. for listening, for caring about history, for taking the time to hear an old journalist reminisce about the most important night of their life. I want to hear from you now. In the comments below, what walls are you seeing in your world? What divisions need to end? What impossible things need to become possible? And what are you doing about it? Are you chipping away at the walls with your own metaphorical hammer? Or are you waiting for someone else to tear them down? Hit me in the comments. Let's talk about walls, about freedom, about what's possible when ordinary people decide they've had enough. And if this video meant something to you, if this story mattered, do me a favor. Share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that walls can fall. That change is possible, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Hit that subscribe button if you want more history from someone who was actually there. More stories from the moments that changed the world. And remember, the wall fell on November 9th, 1989. But the fight for freedom never stops, never ends. Every generation has to fight it again. Your turn starts now. What walls will you tear down?